Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Raman SERS for COVID-19 detection and phosphorescence lifetime determination. It's been a long time since we had a webinar. Good to meet everyone virtually after a very long time. Thank Thank you for taking time out and being here today. Hope everyone is safe and are doing well in the second wave of pandemic. We are trying to do our best to contribute in every possible way in such situations. Even during lockdown, we continue to supply instruments and accessories for research purpose and we help our customers with online support. So, we as a scientific community have to come together virtually and fight off this virus. I am Shilpa Ramesh from Sensel International. I'm working as a sales and service engineer for 4 years in this company, and I will be hosting today's session. So, little about Sensel International. Sensel International is a pioneering company in marketing and service of highly sophisticated overseas product for India. The company is promoted by scientists and technocrats who have more than 25 years of experience in instrumentation, sales, and support. Sensor International was started in the year 1995 to serve the scientific community. The operation started at Baroda, and within a short span of time, it started its branches all over India. We have 7 branches across India with 35 employees. We deal with a variety of products ranging from spectrometers to electrochemical workstations to spectroradiometers, etc. In today's session, our first speaker, Dr. Ramesh, will be covering introduction to spectroscopy, various detection available, followed by demonstration of how SERS Raman can be used for COVID-19 detection, followed by introduction to phosphorescence and the demonstration of phosphorescence lifetime determination. Then the session will be ended by an interactive question and answer session. So this was about the webinar. At the end of the webinar, we will be sharing a feedback form. Registered members who want a certificate may notify in the same form. If you have any questions, kindly type in the comment section below. We will take up all the questions after the session. Also, who all are online, kindly type in your name and your university or the organization you belong to. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Ramesh. Dr. Ramesh has worked in the field of spectroscopy for more than 28 years. He got his PhD from IIT Kanpur in 1991 and joined IIT Bombay for postdoc. And then later on, he joined Sincil International. He is a part of Sincil International family ever since. He is a senior application support and also the General Manager of Sensil. I would like Dr. Ramesh to continue with the session.
Good morning to everyone. Hi, good morning. Yeah, it's good to meet you after a long time. So I will not take much of your time. Let us start with the what you call presentation. See that whenever we talk about the spectroscopy, we all of us are aware of the conventional spectrophotometers which we get in the boxes. These instruments are very good. That main instruments are configured for that absorption, fluorescence, that various applications that the instruments are available in the market. These are all very good instruments, and which gives that what you call that. It works. I know that from my own experience, it works for the 10 years and 15 years. And these instruments really that is serving that good in the market, and there is no one is going to replace that what you call that the spectrophotometer which is made in the boxes. And now let us see that what are the alternates available in the market and advantages. See, the difference between conventional spectrophotometers and was an inside spectrophotometers. So here the detector part, the light separation and detection is separated by an optical fiber with having that SMA 905 connectors. So the by isolating the detector part and with the optical fiber connectors, what are the advantages we are going to get it over the conventional spectrophotometer, which is configured for one particular application. So in boson inside spectrometers, so previously that we call it boson optics, so they changed the name to boson inside. So the light is brought by the optical fibers through a narrow slit, allowed to fall on a mirror. So it's a reflective mirror. So the light falls on a grating. The most popular grating is that 500 grooves per mm grating. So this acts like a prism that it separates the light. So, so whatever we call it bib gear, so the entire light between that 200 to 1100 nanometer is separated and fallen on another mirror. So this mirror is to increase the path length for a better separation. So here all the light that between that all the colors between the 200 to 1100 or you call it bib gear. So it falls on the 2000 or 3000 sensors. So they have different models. So it has you have electronics and a USB taken to the computer. So this guy, that whatever the spectrometer we call it, so there are several models, USB 4000, flame models and Ocean HDX. There are several models which has small differences. So these models are that what you call that available and which has a USB connectors and a software. One can able to, it allows it see the signals in the computer. So if you have a laser, you saw that optical fiber and you can see that particular wavelength. If you have a LED, that what you call that, you allow that optical fiber, allow any light, white light, you can see the spectrum. So the whatever that spectrometer, it is ready to detect any signals. So most widely used in that what you call lasers. So whenever they have tunable lasers, if you want to see the wavelength, so the optical little bit of scatter, don't allow the entire laser light on the fiber. Little bit of scatter light is sufficient to show the wavelength. Okay. So now let us see what else can be done out of it. Now, whenever we talk about spectrophotometer, you talk absorption, transmission, reflection, photoluminescence, LED emissions. So whether all are possible now? Yes. So if you have a light source, if someone wants only that visible, they can go for that tungsten halogen light source, which is 400 to that 2005 nanometers. So it is restricted to the detector sensitivity. And if someone wants that deuterium tungsten, they can connect it. So all the connections through the light source and detector to samples via the hand-tight screws with the SMA connectors. We call it Amphenol 905. So switching from one application to other application, just remove that optical fibers and you can change that. So you see that the light is brought to that what you call that for when you have solid samples and when we want to do a reflection, light is brought by 6 fibers to the end. The light is allowed to fall on the sample and one fiber takes back to the sensors. So you call it Y-type probe. So whenever you talk about reflection, it's a relative measurement. With reference to that white light, you do one measurement and replace the reference, put your sample and you do a measurement. And measurement time normally in milliseconds. So most of the spectrometers, which operational time is around 3 milliseconds. So in 3 milliseconds, entire detectors, 2000 or 3000 detectors, is read and sent to that what you call that to the shift registers. So that's the time taken, which is for that electronics timings. And if you want to do a transmission of optics, see some glasses and some coatings. If you want to know the band gap, you keep your that sample over here. Source is connected by optical fiber to the top of it, and another collimating lens, another fiber to the detector. So source is same, detector is same, just sampling optics are different. So it allows you to do the transmission. Again, you do the uncoated sample for reference, uncoated samples to get the transmission. Whether 80% transmission or 70% transmission. In all wavelengths, you can get simultaneously. So here is the configuration for absorption. You have a deuterium tungsten light source, optical fiber, brings the light to that what you call sample holder. So it's again that SMA 905 connector, hand-tight screws connected, and put your that what you call that cubed with a solvent and allow the light to come out via fiber to the spectrometer to the computer. Do your referencing and take out the sample, put the sample back, and just you do the measurements. In less than a second, your measurements are done. And if someone wanted to do a variable temperature, they can go for specialized that cuvette holders. where you can able to have the temperature of that minus 35 to 100 degrees Celsius. So, and if this is the configuration for photoluminescence or fluorescence, you call it. You have a LED. That LED allows that what you call that particular wavelength to fall on that your sample. It excites. And whatever the fluorescence or emission signals is through a collimating lens put to the optical fiber, collected via the spectrometer over here, and it is sensed. And so this is a sample holder for liquid for the fluorescence configuration. For solids, either you can put that what you call your sample of powder or that coated materials over here. You can open and place it. Here you put that what you call that excitation LEDs. And there is a fiber to take it to the sensors. So if you see that the instrument is ready for the emissions. Okay, now this configuration allows to do a reflection. This kind of sampling arrangements for the transmissions and yet suitable light source for the absorption for the entire wavelength range and 90-degree holders and a four-side transparent cuvettes allow to do the photoluminescence. So we having that a good light source and detector with the sampling accessories. One can do absorption, reflection, transmission, fluorescence, and what you call LED or laser emissions. So basically that if there is any optics lab or a lab with the physics labs, they will find that what you call that all the applications are quite useful. So that you do not have to spend too much money on the what you call that each and every for configurations. Now, is it possible for us to use the same detector for the Raman? No. So here the main issue is that the grating cannot be replaced. If you want to do a entire what do you call that wavelength range. So, for example, if I use a silicon photodiode sensors or a CCD or CMOS, so these are all sensitive between the 200 to 1100 nanometer. If I want to have an entire spectrum on the computer, I have to use low resolution gratings. So whereas that Raman signals are very sharp, and naturally that I have to use the gratings with the higher growth. So here user cannot able to replace the gratings. So I have to use the what you call that gratings with the higher one. So naturally that I may have to use the different spectrometers for the Raman. So that is the reason I did not include that Raman in the what you call that the applications. But detectors can be configured for the Raman, but it is specific for that only for that applications. Okay. Now let us come to the main topic of that Raman and phosphorescence. So what is Raman here? You take any white powder, allow that light to fall on it. You'll see most of the light are scattered. That you call it Rayleigh scattering. Whatever the light you put, it comes back that. So 99.99% of that light comes as such. Okay, and 0.01% of the light, either it what do you call that shift to that higher wavelength or to the lower wavelength, depending on the energy levels. So when the energy is higher, you call it anti-Stokes or the long run wavelength, and when when the energy is at lower, you call it Stokes. Either you call it Stokes and anti-Stokes. Anti-Stokes signals are very weak, and you cannot even that Raman signal itself is weak, and the anti-Stokes lines are much weaker. So you practically cannot able to see those anti-Stokes lines. So our measurement is restricted to that what you call measuring the Stokes bands. So these are all the typical what you call that Raman spectrum what we get either from this instrument or any other instrument. So you will get that what you call very soft signals. And here normally it is plotted in that per centimeter, the way that you do in FTIRs. So that between that 300 to that 3500 per centimeter, you can able to see the very soft signals. Normally that Raman spectrometer resolution what we get over is 6 centimeter per square, so 6 by centimeter. So this is the resolution you get out of it since the detectors are that fixed. So whenever the monochromator based system, they allow better what I call resolution by operating that using a stepper motor. So here we get around that what I call that 6 centimeter inverse we get it. Now let us go for the demonstration. So where that Silpa will show that how that the measurement has been done.
Hi, my name is Derek Gunther. I'm Senior Application Scientist here at Ocean Insight. And as we all know, our world is plagued with many different diseases, and in recent months, this year in particular, we've heard of a new one that you may know of. I always forget the name. It's called coronavirus. You may have to look that up on Wikipedia. Joking aside, as we all fight to work through the coronavirus pandemic, we do have 4 key tools to actively fight that. And those include 1, distancing, 2, we have vaccines, 3, treatments, and then 4, the detection aspect of it. And that's what we're going to look at today. And detection really includes both the virus itself for those that are currently infected and antibodies to let us know who has had the virus, where the virus has been historically, so that we can trace things and intelligently know how to plan for the next steps in this whole phased reduction approach. The traditional methods for looking at detection are typically using PCR, or polymerase chain reaction, but it does have limitations, mainly in how much time it takes. So what we're looking at here is actually a laser interrogation technique called Raman. So what is Raman? When you throw photons at a molecule, most of them come out of the molecule at the same energy level, and that's called Rayleigh scatterings. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes, and it's a very low probability, we're talking a 1 in a million chance here, that the photon will interact with the molecular structure and different ligands and functional groups in such a way that it either picks up or loses some energy based on that structure. And what we have here are actually some antibody samples from the SARS COVID-19 protein. So let's take a look and see how well we can do at detecting this using the typical Raman SERS setup. First, let's look at all the hardware that we're using for this. So this includes our laser source, the 785 laser source. We can see here on the front of the display, we have some numbers shown in red, and this is an arbitrary power output for this unit because this offers adjustable power. We want to make sure that we have enough power to get signal, but not so much that we're burning the sample. So we have it right now set to 0.321, which is a bit arbitrary, but is equivalent to roughly 25 milliwatts of power. And this probe that we're using, this is one of our standard 785 nanometer laser probes that has individual fibers to run to the laser and then also to the spectrometer. And this is going to attenuate the power from the laser a bit, so that's why we can't just take the laser power directly from the laser, but we're actually taking it out of the output port of the probe itself. The spectrometer we're using here is the QE Pro high performance spectrometer, and this is a high resolution spectrometer with very good sensitivity for low light scenarios such as Raman emissions, which are very low probability types of emissions. And this has been a tried and true device for well over a decade for us and for many customers that are using it at applications that are pushing the limits of spectral detection. And what we're using with these components is a SERS holder. So this is a holder for our substrates. So these substrates come in a convenient 5-pack and they're very low cost. So they're meant to be consumables. And these fit right into the Raman SERS holder, just like so. So we have this sample from Sigma in just a very small 25 microliter volume, but that gives us enough even at that microliter level to get some meaningful SERS measurements out of that. So all we're going to do is show you how easy it is to take a sample background scan of our SERS substrate and then apply the analyte and get a meaningful reading from that sample. So this is ultra pure water that we acquired, and this is also the same water that we reconstituted the protein back into solution. So that's important that we're not using different types of water that may have different impurities in them that could show up as different analytes. So we know that this is a very good blank. So we're just taking about 5 microliters of this, and we're going to place it onto our SERS substrate, and we're going to inject it just like so. We're going to stick that right into the holder. Now if we turn on our laser, we're going to see some emissions here. So the first plot that we're looking at right here on the left is just the raw Raman output. And this is set up through a very simple wizard where all you're essentially doing is taking a dark scan with the laser off, and then with the laser on, now we're seeing all these emissions and changing our X values to, let's say, maybe 350. And now we can see some clear Raman activity. What we're looking at in this view is what's called clean peaks. Clean peaks is an algorithm that will automatically detect what it believes to be background signal or a baseline, and it turns that into a stable x-axis reading, and it allows any peaks that it deems as statistically significant and over that baseline to register as actual peaks. So you can actually still see those meaningful activities there. So again, if we scale this, we're getting some nice emission. Now the last view that we have here is called SNV view. This looks very similar to the raw output, but let's take a look at the y-axis and how these are different. So in the raw view, we're seeing intensity counts in the order of thousands of counts. But now, even though this says intensity counts, it's actually a transformation. It's an SNV transformed intensity reading. And what this does is it brings everything to more of an integer level right around the x-axis. And we can go into the schematic and see exactly what that's doing and why we're doing that. So what we're doing here is we're actually taking a sub-range of this limited area of the spectrum across the x-axis that we know is an area we want to look at. And we're taking an average of that. And now we're subtracting that average from the signal. So this is the key signal. This is the raw signal. And we're taking the average over that range, which we can now see is around 1,400 counts. We're subtracting that, and then we're dividing it by the standard deviation, which is this node here. The standard deviation at this point in time is around 330 counts. And we're dividing it by that value, and what that's doing is normalizing this right around the x-axis. And this can be very important and meaningful to pull apart activities that are otherwise hidden in the signal. A useful part of Ocean View is the ability to take some snapshots of what you're looking at now. So if we click on this camera icon, it's going to freeze that in place of what we're looking at now. Let's do that here on this one as well. So we know what this looks like now, what to expect without our analyte present. So let's go ahead and apply some of our COVID antibody on there. So we're going to take out our substrate, uncap our reconstituted COVID antibody. We're going to take another 5 microliters. Let's stick that right onto the substrate there. Excellent. So now, with this protein present. Let's stick that right back into our holder. And now we're seeing some different activities than we were. So in the raw view, we just see an overall vertical jump, right? And sometimes that can make things difficult to determine where changes are actually occurring because you're seeing so much of a vertical offset that the individual minute changes aren't so easy to pick out, right? But that's where our SNV comes in. Now we're looking at the SNV view, and now we're seeing, relative to the original signal, some depressions and some amplifications. These peaks that were present both before and after, those are inherent to some of the proprietary components we put into these substrates to help with that enhancement. And that's why it's important to take that background. But knowing where those activities are, that's something, for example, here, that's very consistent, we can see then that we're getting an amplification of the signal right in this region, and we're getting some depressions down in other regions here. And we're seeing a little bit, I'm actually seeing a nice peak formation right there, which we saw in some prior COVID-related samples. So this is something that may very well hold true and would be an important part of a measurement for COVID detection. So the point here is to show how easy it is to just apply a few microliters of sample to your substrate, put it into the Raman holder, and get some meaningful measurements and some really unique peak activities out of your analyte, even at trace levels of things that are very hard to detect, such as novel biologicals and things like that. This form factor uses gold nanoparticles embedded into a proprietary quartz matrix. The gold, which is tuned for 785 nanometers, we also offer it in silver, which is more tuned to 532 nanometers, and both of which can be used with 638 nanometer lasers. This is the same gold colloid or gold nanoparticles that we put into the solid substrates, but they're left in aqueous solution called SERS or liquid SERS, and this brings with it a whole range of benefits. The most notable of which is probably the long shelf life. The shelf life on these is a year or longer. The solid substrates all come with a batch number and a best if used by date. Now that best if used by date is not an expiration date. That's a common question. You're going to get essentially 100% performance from these if they're used before that date and kept stored well. But as you pass that date, you may be getting 90% performance, 80% performance, and you get that degradation over time. The SERS, the liquid form factor, doesn't see that same degradation. The SERS will be stable for a year or more. The other big improvement that these offer is repeatability for concentration and quantification of the analyte. In the liquid form factor, everything is very homogeneously distributed and very uniformly present in that aqueous solution. As a result, you get much more repeatable concentration measurements so that you're able to quantify things with much higher accuracy and confidence. The other key thing to note is the laser power. You can't burn these. This is just an aqueous solution. So that water-based solution is never going to burn, even at maximum laser power. So we have another great accessory here, a vial holder that lets you put this right in to the sample holder and then have the probe butt up right against the vial, and it's focused perfectly so that you're having that Raman laser focus right in the middle of that analyte solution. So we're going to go ahead and place the SERS into the holder and put the laser right into its respective holder. And there's a set screw here to make sure everything is nice and secure. Put the cap on, and let's take a background scan. So in the software, we can go ahead and just hit the dark button, and we can see that that's been zeroed out. So now if we go ahead and take this out and add in some of our analytes, so we're going to take actually now about 10 microliters of our COVID antibody. We're going to place that into the SERS, give it a little bit of a swirl, and place that back in the vial holder. Now we're getting a fresh reading. So let's take a look at our raw mode. And notice that we're not seeing quite as much activity here as we had with the solid substrates. But this goes to show how easy it is to apply some sample into a liquid SERS measurement and then take that snapshot. It's very important to take an initial background snapshot so that you can subtract that out or do an SNV processing or something like that to really capture what the true activity of the analyte is. Additionally, you need to find that Goldilocks zone for the laser power. If you go too high on the laser power, you're going to burn the sample, and you're going to know that because your spectra are going to go off the charts, and you're going to see smoke physically coming off of your substrate or off of the sample there. On the flip side, if you don't add enough laser power, you're not going to get that photo interaction, you're not going to get that Raman emission that's really going to tell you about your sample. A common question that folks have is about multi-use. Can you use these multiple times on different analytes or the same analyte? We don't recommend it for different analytes, but on the same analyte, you can actually use different parts of the real estate of this substrate because there is enough room there to potentially put on some additional aliquots of fluid that has the analyte in there. And you can also use the same substrate for a blank, as we saw in the demo, taking a blank water sample is first on the same substrate, and then bringing in the analyte to take a snapshot of that. We do recommend that you keep them in the sealed bag. When you're applying your analyte, try not to use more than 15 microliters. You don't want your substrate to be too wet. And lastly, you want to make sure you have the right combo of metal and wavelength and analyte. And what does that mean? Well, we offer both gold and silver SERS substrates. You want to pick a metal that's in tune with the laser wavelength. Additionally, there's certain analytes that have a higher affinity for a certain metal. So that's one of the key things to make sure you're really getting the right combo of the metal type, the analyte, and that wavelength so that they're in tune with each other and you're getting the most out of your Raman signals.
Yeah, Derek could able to explain the Raman measurements in a very simple manner. So he had a laser source and a probe, and simply put it on that what he call sample, and could able to, since because of that diode array sensors or whatever that multi-array sensors. So all the signals are that being detected by the detectors. So normally that whenever the laser light falls on it, as we know that 99.99% will be reflected back. So normally in the probe they put a what do you call that? Mask. So filter out that what you call that incident light, so that only the scattered signals, that's a Raman signal, goes to the sensors and it is being detected. So it takes few seconds to the detection, and Derek could able to explain it very well. Now let us go to the next one. So what is phosphorescence? So before going to that what you call how the measurement is done, let us spend some time in the basics of that. So when you have a sample which has some absorption peak, you allow that particular wavelength to fall on that. It go to the excited states with having that various vibration energy levels. So that it comes back to that some state, and when it returns back, if it does not come back to that original state, whereas some other energy levels, you call it fluorescence. And whenever there is a what do you call that lower energy levels which is stable compared to the higher energy levels. So if you see the absorption, it goes and comes back immediately. So that that time scale is somewhere around that what you call femtoseconds, or still faster than that. And when that photon finds some lower energy level, any lower energy levels are comparatively stable. So there that because of that stability, the resultant photon comes back to that with some delay, time delay. So sometimes it is in picosecond, sometimes it is in nanoseconds. And instead of coming back directly, and if the spin changes and energy level is much lower, so the stability of that photon is much better. So here that the time delay to come back to the ground state is somewhere in microseconds or milliseconds. So conventional fluorescence lifetime measurement systems is to have a PMT kind of detectors, which has that the response time is in that somewhere in picoseconds or the nanoseconds. Here, yeah, as we had seen that some of the spectrometer like USB 4000 and Flame and HR models takes few milliseconds to record the entire spectrum. Whereas the Wosen effects, which has a faster electronics and which has a buffer to take the spectrum. So this needs some few microseconds time only. So now the question is, using that Wosen effects, where that time scale of sensitivity is in microsecond, is it possible to do the lifetime measurements of it? Yeah. Now, some of you might have been familiar with the time correlated single photon counting, or what you call the time domain measurement. So you excite your sample using a very short pulse and allow that it to decay to the original state. So this is a decay process. So when that intensity comes to that approximately that 40% of it, then you call it's a lifetime. So as we had seen that for organic and some many of the samples, for fluorescence, lifetime will be the nanoseconds or the picosecond time scale. Now, is it the only method available to find out the lifetime? So there is one more method which is known for decades, is the frequency domain. So you modulate that what you call LED of the laser to a frequency. Either you modulate in hertz or kilohertz or that megahertz, depending on the change in the lifetimes. So basically that you generate a frequency, apply it on your sample. When because of that phosphorescence, assume that there is a sample which has a phosphorescence, which definitely going to delay the photons. So the delay is can be expressed in the phase shift. So how much is the phase is shifted? So that tells me that what is the lifetime. See, for example, just for an example, I'm generating a 1 hertz frequency. If my maxima is shifted to that what you call middle of it, I know that it is that time lifetime is 0.5 seconds. Instead of that, what you call that maxima is over here. If the maxima is somewhere here, I know that lifetime is somewhere around 0.25 seconds. So same way, I can able to generate the frequency in kilohertz or that megahertz, depending on the LED what I'm going to use it. So I generate a frequency of the laser. I can modulate it. Laser or LED can modulate, generate the frequency, apply it on a sample, and using that phase difference, one can calculate the lifetime. So we are going to use this method to find out the lifetime of the phosphorescence samples. So let us see that how we are going to do the measurement practically.
Hi, my name is Derek Gunther, and I'm Senior Application Scientist here at Ocean Insight. And in this demo, we're going to take a look at phosphorescence, and specifically high-speed phosphorescence characterization using broadband high-speed spectral devices. Maybe familiar with the glowy bouncy balls and different children's toys and watch hands, things like that. Even though they're often used in children's toys, it can be serious business. By using these materials, you can have a clearly marked exit way, a clearly marked exit sign that can last for a long time even though there's no power, and that can be critical to saving lives. And to measure these isn't just arbitrary. There are ASTM standards that require equipment that can measure this photoluminescence in both a steady state and a time-resolved manner. So our samples here that we're going to look at today are some various inorganic powders that have these rare earth elements doped within them, and they have some really cool properties that we're going to look at and doing very high speed microsecond level acquisitions to do time-resolved decays of these phosphorescent compounds. So let's take a look and see how those turn out. So we're going to look at both of these using a UV or near UV excitations. Strontium aluminate doped with europium and dysprosium, and also a more proprietary generated YYG 557 230 isophore, and our LED module called the LSM LED controller. And this is a platform for LED emission that lets you change wavelength, frequency, duty cycle, waveform, a whole host of things that we're going to go through. And we're also using our fastest spectrometer, the Ocean FX, and this is really unique because it does broadband acquisition at 220 microseconds in something called burst mode. We have a small amount of yellow powder in a small wave boat, and we have a reflection probe. This is a standard UV vis reflection probe over that wave boat, and the reflection probe is connected to our LSM LED light source module, and then the receiving end of that probe is connected to the Ocean FX high-speed spectrometer. So all we have to do now is press the power button on this touchscreen display, and that's going to start a blue light on the wayboat. It's off of the yellow powder, but look what happens when we slide that yellow powder into the path of that blue light. We get a very, very strong white emission. If we take a look at the software, we can see a very nice, strong emission, very clear emission, just above 550 nanometers, right around 560 actually. So, and this is expected in literature for this compound that we purchased offline. And we can also see the LED, the 405 LED emission right here as well. So we're getting a nice response from that. Now, let's take a look also at changing the wavelength. Whether you're doing transmission, reflection, absorbance measurements, you're able to change that wavelength very easily just by changing a simple plug on the LED module. So if we unplug this LED and fiber, and now change to our 365, and make sure that's a nice threaded connection. So now let's change our sample to another compound, the strontium aluminate compound we had mentioned. And we're going to excite this one with the 365. So yet again, let's go ahead and press the power button on our module. And we can see that there's a little bit, it's not as apparent because we don't see that UV quite as clearly. But we can see that there's still a blue light here on the wayboat. Now if we move it over this white powder, we're going to see something that you may have seen as a kid quite a bit, which is that glowing green that's very inherent to a lot of glow-in-the-dark type of materials. So if we turn off the LED like so, that phosphorescence signal is going to decay down to nothing, right? And we can see that in the software. We're not getting any emission anymore versus if we have the LED on, we get, and this one is actually a little lower in terms of its emission wavelength. We're down at 535 about nanometers for this, for that green signal. This is great for steady state standard spectroscopy analysis, but what we want to do now is time-resolved measurement. So time-resolved can mean a number of things. A lot of folks are thinking about this in terms of photo bleaching, for if we were to leave this for hours under continuous exposure, how would that signal degrade over time? That should follow an exponential decay. And that's something that just naturally occurs due to the excitation and that mechanism of exciting those molecules with that energy. And it's decaying its ability to output those photons at that higher wavelength. And that's something that is very meaningful for a QC protocol. It can tell you a lot about how strong of a phosphorescent material this is. But there's another way to do this that's ultra fast. And normally you would be doing this with a point detector, but we're going to do this now with some broadband detection and show you how to do a strip chart in Ocean View to log that in real time. So this is where the power of the LSM LED really comes in. So we're going to look now, we already looked at how to change wavelength, but now we're going to take a look at how to change the waveforms and the frequencies and the duty cycles and what that looks like in the software. So on the LSM LED module, you're able to change, as we saw, the wavelength, but you can also change the intensity. Right now we're running at 100% intensity, but if you just hold on the screen, you can change this to, let's say, 50. Just hit enter, and now you're running at 50% intensity. But now you can do a lot of other things as well. If you go to the little gear button here, you can change the waveform type. It's the first option. So let's do that. The key first option is just internal DC, which is a continuous feed of power to the LED. And that's what you're going to be using most of the time for things like we talked about, absorbance, transmission, reflectance, and so on. But these time-resolved measurements, coupled with the OFX, open up a whole new door of measurement possibilities. And we're going to take a look at that. If we move to, let's say, the square wave, this is going to pulse the LED, and we can change the frequency of this. The first thing we're going to look at is a square wave at 20% using this 365 nanometer LED, and all we're going to do is hold our finger over the frequency number, change it to 20, hit enter. So now we're at 20 hertz, and we're already at 100% power, and we're going to change the duty cycle as well. So the duty cycle is how long the LED is on and then how long it's off, and the percentage represents how long it's on. So we want it to be 50% on. So if we just hold over that value, press 50 and enter. Now we're running at 20 hertz, 50%, but we haven't started yet. So let's go ahead and hit start on this. So now we can see that there's a very fast flash, and you can see some of the powder from this phosphorescent material in the middle of the wayboat there. So we can see that flash very quickly, and also on the software, take a look at that LED emission. We can see that jittering up and down very clearly, right? So that's what we're looking at. So if we move this over the phosphorescent material, we're going to see that same jitter right there at around 530, 535 nanometers. So let's say if we want to capture that, every time the LED is turning on, the phosphorescence is jumping up. And every time the LED turns off, the phosphorescence decays. So that decay time is indicative of how strong that phosphorescent material is, and that can be used with ASTM standards to measure how viable it is to use for, let's say, the safety illumination for stairwells and egress lighting. So that's exactly what we're measuring. Let's take a look at the Ocean FX ability to run in burst mode. So this is very unique. If we bring this down and note that we're only running at 10 microseconds, and we have about 10 boxcar width on there. So if we move to burst mode and let it run, let's say 1,000 scans, but let's maybe increase that to 10,000 scans. So if we hit start, we're going to see this running in slow motion. So take a look at this. We're just seeing that 50% duty cycle on and off, but in real time. So this is dramatically slowed down. And we can actually capture this. And if we hit stop and clear, that'll clear it. But if we set up a strip chart, for example, we're going to go ahead and look at that 535 nanometer emission. So we're updating every scan. We're going to let this run continuously with a buffer of the same size as our burst mode counts of 10,000. And we're going to look at one wavelength at 535 nanometers. Let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to hit finish. Created this, right? And nothing's happening yet because we haven't started the spectrometer. We've told it to get ready for burst mode. Burst mode says this is going to be a measurement that really needs a fast write to the computer. And so what it does is actually it holds some of that data on the board itself, on the spectrometer, and then writes it as quick as it can to the computer, but it's acquiring data faster than it can write to the computer, so that's why it's holding some of it on board there. And that's why we have this special mode to run at these special extra fast speeds. So let's hit start and take a look at what we get. So we get these nice, look at that. We're getting these nice square wave responses that we can then save. And again, this is running at 20 hertz, so we're able to see this in slow motion. And we can capture this, we can save all of this data and quantify what that decay time looks like. It's hard to see it here, but there are actual exponential decays, and we can also use additional boxcar averaging and so on to look at that. But this shows us a time-resolved method of quantifying phosphorescence. So if we go back to our gear tool to change the settings, we're going to go back to waveform type and change this now to sine wave. Note that there isn't a duty cycle. It says NA for duty cycle for sine wave, and this is very much by design. The sine wave is another continuous type of waveform. So the square wave you could set to be 50% on, 25% on, 70% on, whatever you want, if it's meaningful for that measurement or whatever the application may be. And in sine wave, it's going to be a continuous waveform. So if we hit the start button on the sine wave, now we're going to see a different type of profile in the response, and it's not going to be as jittery. We're going to see a nice smooth response. So let's hit start on this, and look at that. We see a nice raise and lower of both the LED signal right there and our phosphorescence emission right there. And we can track this likewise in a strip chart. So now we can see a very clear and very expected sinusoidal response from that phosphorescence emission. And this can be looked at as a function of the input LED energy, which is also being fed as a sine wave. And the powerful thing here, the important thing, is that we can capture both the LED and the phosphorescence emission on the same spectrometer. So before, if we were using a single wavelength detector, we could only pick one or the other via filtering, or pick up the whole signal together, which wouldn't tell us anything. But now we can figure out what the phase shift is. So the LED sine response is going to be shifted from the output of the phosphorescence, and that shift again can be correlated in degrees and radians to the phosphorescent quality of this material, because there is some literature value associated with that. So whether you're looking at decay time using a square wave, or if you're looking at phase shift using a sine wave, those are two different ways to look and quantify the phosphorescence or the fluorescent properties of these types of compounds. In addition to the safety and egress lighting applications for these phosphorescent compounds, there are some other new biomedical applications that these are finding their way into. And we hope that this demo showed the speed and versatility of our light sources and our spectrometers.
Yeah, Derek could able to explain that using that LED controller, how we can able to modulate the frequencies, and from there how we can able to measure it. See, we had seen that detectors, like whatever spectrometer we call it, USB, HR, and other models, flame models, allows us to do absorption, reflection, transmission, and fluorescence, and LED or the laser emissions. And the Raman could not be possible with the same setup. Why? Because of that requirement of higher groove density requirements. Whereas if someone chooses the ozone effects, which has a microsecond spectrum response for the entire wavelength region, so one can add that lifetime also in it. So, so the lifetime we need appropriate LED modulators to do that. As of now, users can record that. You can generate the frequent sinusoidal waves, and they can record that difference in the phases. And from the Excel data, user may have to calculate the lifetime, and the software improvements are on, such that the fitting can be done by the ozonotic software itself. The presently that the users has to calculate the lifetime, and let us see that what else that what you call that can be covered now. Yeah, whenever we talk about that the fluorescence kind of things, the one related equipment which is made by Oceanoptics is the Neofox. So here they make a gel. When we exceed it with the 405 nanometer, it emits at 550 nanometer. They make some ruthenium complexes, the gel, and when there is the oxygen, atmospheric oxygen is exposed, the excited photons comes back. That relaxation becomes much faster. So, so this is one of the phenomena to find out the oxygen. Now, many research groups are working on the oxygen concentrator kind of things. If someone want to have a quick feedback, they can have this Neofox setup, which has the 405 LED and a detector, and as well as the salt gel which is kept on the tip. Simply insert the probe where there is a oxygen comes out. You can able to monitor the oxygen online. So the probe has everything that you have a ruthenium material being coated on it, light in and comes out. So here, when there is a 100% nitrogen, so if you purge that what you call the working space with the nitrogen or argon gases, so you will get the maximum intensity. The time that you allow that what you call some oxygen, the intensity, because of the relaxation, the intensity goes down quite a bit. Based on that, oxygen is detected. So this can be used in the research purposes. Whoever is working in the oxygen concentrators, they can think of the new facts. So with this one, I am concluding that the whatever that present one to talk about that the Raman for that COVID detection and phosphorescence material for that. And if there is any other question and answers, and please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for this elaborate presentations, and the demonstrations that you showed us were really very informative and really nice. So thank you for that. So now let's just move on to the question and answer sessions. I'll just read out the questions which were asked by some of the participants, and then you may answer the same. So one question is, can we use existing USB or flame spectrometers to do phosphorescence measurements?
See, the main problem with the present spectrometers, see, when if you see how that spectrometer works, you have a CCD sensors, you have a photosensitive material. You allow the photons to fall on it, and here it converts into electrons. So the electrons are read by that what I call that sensing materials. So the electrons are drained and it is sensed and it is counted. And that way that the different sensors will be having the different electrons, which corresponds to the number of photons which is exposed. Now that requires some time that before it is ready for another photons, that there should be enough time to drain and read the 3600 sensors. The presently it takes 3.5 millisecond to record that 3000 sensors. Now most of the what do you call that the phosphorescence materials, somewhere in that between that microseconds to milliseconds. So the present spectrometers cannot be good enough to record the lifetimes of the phosphorescence. Maybe that a very long lifetime, somewhere in seconds, may be possible. So that most of the samples that present spectrometer cannot be used for the lifetime measurements.
Okay. I would just like to ask you one more question. I mean, few more questions. Before that, I would just like to thank the audience for being a great audience, and then kindly fill back the feedback form. We'll be sending the link shortly, and then if you want to, I mean, if you want to see more such videos, you can just like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And then also, if you have any requirement of electrodes or electrodes for electrochemical workstation, or any accessories or spectroscopy based instrument, you can contact us on info@sensel.in. And with this, I mean, I would like to again move on with the question and answer session. So the next question which was asked is, why is QE Pro a good detector for Raman?
Yeah, QPro that this has a I think 64 detector arrays, so that it is binned, that each wavelength array is binned. So you have a better signals, and signal to noise ratio is very good, and sensitivity, number of photons. For example, in Sony USB models, so which when 50 photon falls on it, it converts to one electron. Whereas that in this case, 22 photon falls on it, it converts to one electron. So that the sensitivity and number of detector arrays, and the cooling ability, that it cools to 25 degrees less than the room temperature. So the thermal noise is less. These are the three factors makes it better what I call that spectrometer for the Raman, where the Raman signals are bound to be very low. So you need to have a better sensitive instrument. So among that group, best sensitivity is at the Q Pro. And if there is any problem in the funds, the people can think of that Ocean HDX models, which is uncooled, but priced to half.
Okay. So the next question which was asked is how good TE cooled QE Pro, I mean comparison between TE cooled QE Pro and Ocean FX for the Raman application.
The Raman, it is we need to have a larger what do you call that optical bench to for a better resolution. So if you ask me a question to compare that Ocean HDX, Q Pro, Ocean HDX, and Ocean FX. So my choice is at best is at Q Pro. The second best is Ocean HDX. Third one is at Ocean FX. Ocean FX does not have that much resolution. It has better in that time, what do you call measurements. So it is faster. But if you want to have resolution and sensitivity, I can say that HDX is the second best choice.
Okay. So there is a question if we can provide details on clean peak systems and SNV system in QE Pro spectrometer. So yeah, you can contact us on info@sensor. You will get all the data you want of the same. Are there any more questions? How can we use both systems for the quantification and analysis of Raman spectra?
See, quantification, any quantification, you need to have that identical configuration, that laser power and a probe, that what do you call that, the orientation and integration time. And if we keep everything constant, and we need to have build a, what do you call that, a calibration procedures with having the various concentrations, how the a particular intensity varies, and through which you can able to correlate. But through Raman, it's little bit difficult because of the we have to identical thing we have to do all over the samples. So at different, for example, you do one measurement today, it's very easier. See, for example, you remove the setup and try to build it tomorrow. There may be some changes, which will be a challenge. But as long as you keep the identical configuration and with a known concentration, if you calibrate it, it's possible.
Okay. So I think we would like to conclude the session with this. All the questions have been answered. Thanks a lot, sir. It was a very informative session, as I said, and I am sure each one of us was benefited a lot by the session. Thank you so much. Yeah, and one more time, I would like to tell all the participants that if you want to see more such videos on different research equipment, you can subscribe to our channel so you will be notified every time, and also the bell icon so you'll be notified every time we are going to upload, and we are uploading a new video, and we are having a webinar. Thank you so much, and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye.